Hi everybody, Rick Stiggins here, and I want to address a central question that I think is important in the realm of assessment in American education, and that is this question: can assessment help our students realize their dreams? And I want to answer the question in a wide variety of very important ways. The resounding answer is yes, it definitely can. But assessment can only help students realize their dreams if certain essential conditions are satisfied. Let's go first then to the first key to helpful, productive, instructionally relevant assessment processes. They need to align, as I said, with a new school mission, which means we need to balance our local assessment systems. In all of my work, the focus of attention in improving assessment is at the local level. While evidence may come to us from a variety of sources outside the local district, all of the instructional decisions are made locally. And so I want to focus on what needs to happen at the local classroom, building, district level with regard to building assessment systems that fulfill the mission. Let's talk about the evolution of the mission of schools in America. As our society has continued to evolve, so must its schools to serve new purposes. And so must the role of assessment in those evolving schools. And so I'm contending in this presentation that we need a new vision of excellence in assessment in American education. And I want to describe for you some of the details of that new mission. Society has issued to its schools new directives. We see this in the media all the time. We want to narrow achievement score gaps. Well, we want to reduce dropout rates. We're looking for universal high school graduation. In the state of Oregon, my home state, the governor has decreed that we should achieve universal high school graduation by the year 2025. It's a big mission statement on the part of schools. We want all students, and again, we hear this constantly in the news, all students ready for college and workplace training. In other words, what society is saying is that we need to produce lifelong learners. Students who are masters of the proficiencies that will allow them to continue to grow with a rapidly evolving society. And it is so critically important, social commentators are saying, is that our economic and social prosperity depends on the ability of schools to deliver lifelong learners. Well, I want to translate that into what I'm seeing as a fundamental change in the mission of this social institution called schools. Those were not the missions that most of us saw in the schools that we grew up in. As a matter of fact, I submit to you that for most adults today, the schools that we graduated from, if we graduated, had this mission. That is to weed out the unwilling or unable. We call them dropouts. About 25%, very stable 25% over the decades, drop out prior to graduation from high school. And then the second part of the mission has been to rank the remaining students based on achievement from the highest achiever to the lowest achiever. And if society saw a valedictorian and a salutatorian and everybody had a rank in class, they would nod approvingly and say, yep, the institution worked just as it was supposed to. It was supposed to begin to sort us into the various segments of our social and economic system. But here's the problem that has evolved with the rapid evolution of our society, and that is those dropouts and those who finish low on the rank order fail to develop what we now define as essential lifelong learning proficiencies. And it's for this reason, then, that we hear about this new mission where all students, not just those at the top of the rank order, become proficient readers, writers, math problem solvers, and prepared to live productively in the digital age. I submit to you that is a fundamental change in the social institution of the school. Now, as a result of this, we need to rethink some really important things about this achievement score gap between those who meet and don't meet our standards. And society is saying all students must meet those standards. And the point I want you to understand is that for most of us in the world that we grew up in, assessment's purpose wasn't to narrow the gap. It was to exacerbate the gap or at least stabilize it. That's what a dependable rank order at the end of high school does. That having been said, however, I will argue in my presentation that assessment can become our most powerful gap narrower. But in order to do that, certain conditions need to be satisfied, and that's what we're going to talk about. Here's how we can do this. The new vision of excellence in assessment that I want to advance is one in which we balance the assessment systems at the local level to meet the information needs of all assessment users, not just the big and powerful ones. This new vision of excellence in assessment relies completely throughout the system, and I'll describe the system in just a minute, relies on quality assessments to deliver dependable information about student achievement. And finally, there is this matter that I think is most unique to this presentation, that I want to talk about the emotional dynamics of the assessment experience from the learner's point of view. And we're going to do that in some detail. So, balanced assessment with quality assessments, helping students feel a sense of control over their own academic well-being. With regard to this matter of balance, we've been operating our assessment systems in the United States for at least 70 years on the assumption that if we just conduct the right standardized test at the right point in the year and deliver the results to the right people, schools will evolve in productive ways. There's compelling evidence that we've believed that annual standardized tests yield good schools. We've been doing it for 70 years, district-wide, statewide, national assessment, international assessment. I have on good authority that we've already shipped a scanner up to the space station, so we'll be ready for interplanetary assessment. Someone cite for me, please, the scholarly reference that I can go to learn that that's been a quality investment in terms of improving student learning. What is the effect size attributable to these annual tests? Attributable to effect size and standard deviation units of improved student learning due to this multi-decade, billions of dollar investment in this belief. Now, it's not that I'm opposed to annual standardized testing, but what we now understand, based on 20 years of good solid research, is that annual assessments balanced with interim benchmark assessments, balanced with high-quality classroom assessment, now we're talking turkey in terms of improving schools. The reason is that critically important data-based instructional decisions are made at all of these levels. And if assessment is the process of gathering information to inform instructional decisions, then I submit to you that in any context, unless we begin with answers to these three questions, what decisions, who's making them, and what information do they need, we don't have hope of making good decisions or using assessment productively in that context. Now, it turns out that the context of use of assessments is critical. And what I mean by this is that we use assessments to influence decisions at the classroom level. This is important, at the classroom level, at the interim benchmark level, and annually. Those contexts bring with them different users with different questions and different information needs. We build balanced assessment systems when we honor the information needs of all of those users. In addition, balanced assessment systems support student learning. We call this in our parlance assessment for learning, and the question here is, how can we use the assessment process and its results to help students learn more? That, as balanced with the use of assessment on the summative side, which is to certify or verify learning. We call those assessments of learning, where we ask how much of our students learned up to this point in time. Different purposes, different ways of using assessment, formative and summative. The mistaken belief has been that annual tests are sufficient. They're not. Balanced assessment is sufficient to inform key decisions. And the point I want to make is that the classroom level of assessment is the one level of those three that has been documented in research to enhance student learning. And so I argue that if we can put all three pieces in place with the classroom level of assessment as the foundation of a balanced system, then we're doing the right thing. Here, let me say that to you in a different way. And I'm going to read this to you as it appears. If classroom assessment isn't working productively day to day in the classroom during the learning, that is, if bad decisions are being made day to day during the learning based on inaccurate information coming from inept classroom assessments, do you understand that the other levels of assessment can't overcome the dire consequences for the learner? The damage has already been done, and you don't fix that every few weeks, once a semester, or once a year. Classroom assessment is the balance. And when we manage the classroom level of assessment productively, achievement score gains abound. One key to productive assessment, that is assessment that really supports student learning when that's the purpose, or verifies or certifies it when that's the purpose, is the quality of the evidence, the information about student achievement that we gather. In this case, what we need to be doing is using high quality assessments to gather dependable information. And what I want to describe for you are some keys to assessment quality that we think are important. And the question I'd like to have you playing around with in your mind is, do your assessments meet these standards of quality classroom assessment? Now, in order to set the stage for that, there are two things that we think define an assessment literate educator. That is, someone who's a master of the principles of good assessment. First of all, they're able to gather dependable information about student achievement, accurate assessment. We're going to talk about specifics of that. And then they're able to use the assessment process and its results to serve the intended purpose. So it's both the attributes of the assessment and attributes of the way in which it's used. Now, I want to talk about the former in this case. Let's talk about, to begin with, let's talk about how to gather good information with quality assessments. We've developed a 5-part quality control framework for classroom assessments and have built our professional development programs around this definition of quality assessment. Note that there are the two big keys: accuracy on the left side, effective use on the right side. And under the heading of accurate assessment, we've got to have a clear purpose, and then at the bottom, clear target. And those two define the context of the assessment. Once we have those clarified, then we can design an assessment to fit into that context. And so let's talk then about this matter of clear purpose. And all we're talking about here is that we need to be clear about who's going to use the results of this assessment and how they're going to use them. Because what we need to do then is to build the assessment to meet the information needs of that intended user. So we need to be clear about the question, why are we assessing? In addition, as a starting place, we've got to start with a clear answer to the question, what is it by way of student achievement that needs to be reflected in the assessment? In this case, our learning targets need to be clear to us, clearly articulated. We can't dependably assess learning targets we've not clearly, completely, and appropriately defined. We also believe they need to be clear to our students in some terms that they understand. We need to think about the kind of learning target that's involved. That is, there are different kinds of achievement that we care about. Sometimes we want our students to master content knowledge. Sometimes we want them to master reasoning proficiencies. Sometimes performance skills. It turns out that different learning targets require assessments of that are different in nature. And so unless we start with a clear sense of what kind of learning we're going for, selecting a proper assessment method is difficult at best. And in addition, we need to make sure, obviously, that whatever assignments we give students or whatever assessments we develop and use for those students align with the targets. That's the whole point. So once we have the purpose then and the target defined, now we're ready to create an assessment to fit into that context. And so design is at hand. Now, in order to design a high-quality assessment, we need to select an assessment method capable of reflecting the learning target. It turns out different assessment methods work differentially well with different kinds of learning. The array of assessment methods that we have at our disposal is limited. These are the choices. There are no more. Selected response, written response, or essay mode of assessment, performance assessment, or direct personal interaction with our students. We need to align those. We need to know when to use each of these, and then we need to know how to use them well. And that's what comes up next. So we need to have an appropriate sample. That is, any test is a sample of all the questions you could have asked but didn't have time for. And so what we do is we ask a representative sample of those questions, and from the student's performance on those, then we draw an inference to their mastery of the domain that it's representative of. And that sampling process turns out to be really, really critical. And it turns out each assessment method carries with it a set of rules of evidence for how to sample appropriately. If we know what those rules of evidence are and we adhere to them, no problem. If we don't know what they are, there's going to be a problem, or don't adhere to them. In addition, we need to know how to create quality test items or assessment exercises and scoring schemes. And it turns out also that in each context, there's a list of things that can go wrong that don't have anything to do with the test itself, but that can distort the results. The problems that come up within the learner, distractions in the environment, sources of bias that can creep in to distort the results. Now, if we know what those potential sources of bias are in each context and we know what to do to prevent them, we can gather good information. If we don't know what the sources are, or we don't know how to prevent them, then there's going to be trouble. And all of this is about becoming an assessment literate educator, that is understanding these things, how to create good quality assessments. So we can design our assessment and administer it, and it will produce results for us. The next key to quality then is on the effective use side. We need to communicate those results effectively. You know, the most dependable assessment in the world whose results are miscommunicated or badly communicated is wasted. So effective communication is the key next step. Now it turns out that the keys to effective communication again differ profoundly as a result of the context. When we're communicating in a formative assessment context where the purpose is to promote student learning, then we need to use to communicate results in a way, in the form of effective feedback that helps the student understand how to do better the next time. In addition, we can teach students to communicate, the keys to communicating about the changes in their own achievement over time, or their achievement status at a point in time. That is, we can open the communication process up and bring students in during their learning, giving them productive ways to share information about their own learning. This on the formative side. On the summative side, where we're talking about grades and grading or standardized tests, we need to make sure that our assessments track student achievement by learning target, so we can summarize that over time and coalesce it into a particular grade. Grades need to communicate achievement and only achievement, and obviously standardized test scores need to be used effectively. We understand how to communicate effectively on the summative side too. Notice that both ways of communicating, or keys to effective communication, are different. Both are important, but they're different. An assessment literate educator understands the differences between the two and can meet standards in both contexts. So there you have our 5-part quality control framework. We got to always have clear purposes. We always got to have effective assessment design, clear targets, effective communication. And now I want to add in the 5th ingredient, which I'll speak of briefly and then amplify later on. And that is that we need to involve students in the assessment process during the learning too, when it's appropriate to do so. That reality is reflected in each of the other keys to quality. We need to understand that students are important instructional decision makers too, so we can inform them for purposes of their decision making. We need to make sure we're using student-friendly learning targets. We can engage our students, for example, in the design and use of practice assessments like those that they're going to be held accountable for at some point down the road, and derive important learning benefits from doing so. We can teach them how to communicate about their own learning. The point is, students can be deeply involved in monitoring, tracking, and managing their own learning over time, in the classroom, day to day, during the learning. All keys to quality. There's a key to productive assessment, that is classroom assessment that supports or verifies student learning, that we don't often think about, that I think is really, really critical. In this case, what I want to talk about is use of the assessment process to promote productive emotional dynamics within the learner, assessment triggering productive dynamics within the learner. In this case, I want to establish that we've said in all of our work that we need to assess student achievement accurately, and we need to use the assessment results productively to promote student learning or to verify it. When the purpose is to promote student learning, there's a dynamic that we need to pay attention to, and that is a little bit unusual given our traditions or our habits of mind and thinking about assessment. You know, we've been operating for decades on the principle that that assessment is something adults do to students. And the different perspective that I want to bring is that students assess their own achievement too and make critically important data-based instructional decisions. As a result of that, then what I want to do is to say to you that we understand more about effective use of assessment today than ever before, and part of it means that we need to make sure when we're using assessment day-to-day in the classroom during the learning that students react productively to assessment results. From an emotional point of view, students respond productively because the student's emotional response to assessment results in any context will determine what that student does about those results. Now, it turns out that students can respond, when students respond productively to their assessment results, we bring them to a place where upon seeing those results, they can say to themselves, I get it. I understand what these results are about. I know what to do next. I know what to do as a result of what I see here. They respond productively when that leads them to the inference that they're okay. They're saying to themselves, I can handle this. Regardless, whether the results are high, mid-range, or low, students respond productively when they can say, I understand, I know what to do about it, I can handle this. Because that brings them to the fourth bullet in this list, which is crucial, where they say to themselves, I choose to keep trying. This is critical because if they respond in a counterproductive way, it leaves them saying, I don't understand the results, or I have no idea what to do about them. Or they're drawing the inference about themselves that I'm no good at this stuff anyway, and they have to say, again, the critical fourth bullet, I quit. Do you see how if we have a student who's not yet met a critical standard and we bring them to this place, the learning has stopped and they're doomed? These are the dynamics that are critical. This is another revolution in thinking about assessment in the classroom. Do you understand that what students think about and do with assessment results is at least as important as what we adults think about and do with those results? Because they interpret their own results and they make decisions. They use the results of their own assessments about them to answer some critical questions, some data-based instructional decisions. And the thing is, they get to go first. So, for example, they're continuously looking at their own academic record in a particular context, and they're asking questions like this: can I learn this, or am I just too dense? Do you understand that if they come down on the wrong side of that, it doesn't matter what you decide about them? Or they're asking of their results, is learning this worth the energy that I'm going to have to spend to attain it? I say to you again, if they come down on the wrong side of that, it doesn't matter what you do with your highfalutin data management systems and complex decision making. The learning has already stopped, and you're out of the ball game. Or think about the struggling learner who's asking this question: is trying to learn this worth the risk that I might fail again in public? Because that public failure just hurts too much. Yeah, I know you hear bravado, but I don't care what you think from students. Hogwash. Of course they care. It matters deeply and it matters personally. They are data-based instructional decision makers, and the dynamics of their approach to that process turns out to be critical. So the critical question we must ask is, can we help our students make productive decisions? That is, the decisions that will lead to productive learning on their behalf, and the answer, once again, is a resounding yes, and the way we do this is through the consistent application of principles of assessment for learning. Note the subtitle, Creating a Culture of Confidence. Now, I know it's not the world, the classroom assessment world we grew up in, but it is the one we either create or stop hoping that the achievement score gaps will narrow. Because if we got students consistently giving up on themselves, there ain't going to be no gap narrowing. And they are. But we know how to stop that. We know how to prevent that. The principles of assessment for learning are built around helping students know the answers to these three questions. Where am I going? Where am I now? And how can I close the gap between the two? In the lessons that we teach about about mastering principles of assessment for learning in order to help students understand where they're going. We want to provide students with a clear, student-friendly version of the learning target from the beginning of the learning, along with examples of student work that reveal to them the progression they'll travel on their journey to that standard. To help them know where they are now, we want to offer regular continuous access to descriptive feedback and teach students over time to be able to generate their own descriptive feedback and become partners with us in setting goals for what comes next in their learning. To help them to close the gap, we want to design instruction around focused lessons on key attributes of good performance, teaching students to revise their work based on those key attributes, and then engaging students in continuous monitoring and self-reflection of their own learning so they can keep track of and communicate with others about their achievement status, about their improvement over time and ultimate achievement status. Principles of assessment for learning. Assessment for confidence.